These are Anthony's theories, not Anthony's hypothesis. I'm coming with them facts. Trigger warning if you're watching this. Here we go. Here's the show, the end of all that. This is Anthony's theories, and these are Anthony's facts.
A driving factor in income inequality.
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't... And when you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
Anybody can jump in. It's an open mic there.
But there has to be racism. You can't say there's no racism.
Without evidence?
No. I'm just saying that I don't know which animal. Maybe we're talking about dogs or something. I'm talking about human beings, and I'm like, human beings are most likely going to have racial prejudices. I'm just so sorry. I'm just so sorry. I don't know. I don't come.
Hey, first and foremost, thank you for taking the time to check out my content. I definitely appreciate it. I'll leave any additional information as far as additional content, social media, all that good stuff in the description. I just want to get right to this video because I'm pretty excited about it. Let's go. Okay, first and foremost, I have to comment on the reaction from the two Black Lives Matter representatives. It was absolutely embarrassing. I cannot believe they could not come up with a better response and just sat there, especially the girl. You saw her, she was like kind of pointing like, you answer. That was pathetic, especially too because at the end he just starts responding with it has to be racism. It has to be racism, instead of just explaining why it is racism. Now, the answer to Ben Shapiro's question, if it isn't culture, why is it racism, is because our culture was built by racism. And I'm going to break that down and we're going to talk about that in full depth, but I just had to first comment on how horrible and embarrassing the response was by those two Black Lives Matter representatives. That's why Black Lives Matter is annoying, but I'll get to them later. Sorry about that. Now, Ben Shapiro, I'm just going to speak directly to Ben Shapiro from this point forward because I'm just going to do that. So Ben Shapiro, you asked, why is it culture over race? Simple answer is that our culture was created and forced upon us solely because of our race, right? How is it created and forced upon us is probably next. Is it forced upon you? Is it forced? You're not being forced at gunpoint. Hold on, Ben. I'm going to get to that. We'll get to the details. My Ben Shapiro impersonation was pretty spot on right there, if you ask me. Now, there's a lot of things that I could point to with black culture that I think are great, like, jazz music. And I just think our unique ability to turn a negative into a positive or see the positive in anything. We can make a joke out of anything. I think a lot of internet culture is because of the humor that comes from black culture, being mimicked through the internet, because we have that ability as a culture to see joy in tragic situations, unfortunately. But we also learned some very horrible characteristics that have seeped into our culture and have pretty much poisoned that culture because of our race, because of the way we were treated by white people, because we were black. Simply put, this country was black and white. That was it. So some examples of things that I like to point to are, stereotypes. But all stereotypes come from, in my opinion, a point of truth or something that makes people, reference this in their mind and creates the stereotype in the first place. Now, a big one for me is whooping kids in stores, how a black mother is known for whooping a child in store aggressively, using profane language, and wearing the child down right there in public. It is a stereotype that comes from a place of reality, where back in the 1920s, pre the abolishment of Jim Crow, not abolishment of slavery, Jim Crow era, pre-civil rights movement, that was a reality that if that black woman took her child out in public and that child acted up, that there would be a line of white men outside ready to teach that child how to behave. So the black mother better teach that child how to behave, because if she didn't, a group of fully grown white men were going to teach that boy for her. That was the reality. A lot of things are the reality. Our anti-police sentiment that is within the black culture. We didn't just decide to hate the police. It was because calling the police was a potential death sentence for a long time. Black on black violence comes from the inability for black people to contact and communicate with the police. These are what created the idea that street gangs were for protection, that drug dealers were perfectly fine, because it was seen as literally the only way to make it to middle income or above in the black community for so long. And to this day, I still think there are systems in place designed to keep primarily black people down, like the welfare state, the welfare system in general. That's the primary one. I don't think there is a such thing as, well, I don't think there's a such thing in modern day as institutional racism or systemic racism, whatever term you want to use. I don't believe in that in modern day, outside of really maybe the welfare state, because the detriment of the black culture, of the family, the nuclear family in the black culture has been deteriorated. So we are kind of unnaturally dependent on the welfare state because of, generations of racism. Now, Ben, this isn't to say that black people don't have to take responsibility for their actions and for creating nuclear families and strong structural communities moving forward. But the idea that you just came out with, like black people are just choosing to have the culture that they have, is nonsense. I'm not going to speak about Africans and any type of history of blacks beyond Americans. The reason why our culture is the way it is was because it was specifically structured this way through Jim Crow, and other methods. So there's a lot to our culture that was forced upon us, and we're seeped in the middle of that today. So it's not as simple as just saying it's not your race, it's your culture, because our culture was created and given to us forcibly because of our race. It's as simple as that, Ben. But while I have you on the phone, let's talk about how we could potentially fix the issue, because it's going to take more than just black leaders to do so. I do think it's going to take leaders from other races as well, but not really necessarily because of their race, but because of their political affiliation. We need to have more Republicans that have a spine and that are willing to fight for the black vote. It's extremely rare, at least as far as from what I see, because I don't see very many pander attempts. I wouldn't even really call it pandering when I see Republicans doing it, because I assume, if Republicans tried, they would come off genuine, just corny, and black people may not respond to it. But I don't see Republicans taking those attempts. They gotta be willing to go to the communities that aren't theirs, go get booed, face hostile crowds and empty events, take a financial loss because you invested in a black business, and bet on the result. And, well, not even bet on it, just invest and see what the outcome is. And if you make profit, reinvest it and spread it and transfer that wealth and see what happens. I don't really see that as something that would be seen as controversial or even questionable if it was like an Asian businessman or a Jewish businessman who invested in his community and really didn't pay attention to whether or not there was profits returned. And if he did pay attention to if there was profits returned, it was genuinely to reinvest it in a community, right? That's something that we don't have really in the black community, even from our own black leaders. So if Republicans were to take a step toward us, it would open up the opportunity for black people to start voting Republican. If black people can start voting Republican, we can solve our biggest problem, which is holding our own leaders accountable. Black leaders are really given a pass almost always when it comes to political issues in the black community. When a black person becomes a senator, congressperson, mayor, or governor, it feels like, in any black community, the only way to get them out is with another black person. And that person obviously has to be a Democrat, because that's the only thing that exists in the black community in reality. Well, okay, not in reality. That's a stretch, right? I know Candace Owens has her own movement. I like Brandon Tatum, guys like that, the Hodge twins. I know about a bunch of those guys. But either way, whether it's Republican or it's even just an advancement of the independent movement in the black community, there has to be some way that we can remove this somewhat of an immunity that Democrats, and especially black Democrats who are people of color, I hate that term, we really just have to, look, Ben, I'm sorry, Ben, look, I'm not going to hold you up all day. I'm just going to end it by saying this really quick. The biggest problem with what you said comes down to, yes, you're right, culture is the problem, but racism is what created our culture. Our culture is a result of racism. So even though racism, in my opinion, I agree with you, systemic racism, all of that does not exist today within the context that a lot of those, people who disagree with you on a lot of issues and think you're, evil, right? Those people. But there are deep issues within the black community which happened as a result of systemic racism. So even though it's no longer active today, there are things that we can do today to actively promote a change in that culture. I have a lot of ways that I would recommend black people can change culture. But as far as this conversation today with you, Ben Shapiro, who I think may listen to this at some point in my lifetime, maybe, and maybe we can debate. But you, Ben Shapiro, have the ability to help, as most right-wing or Republican political, but actually more importantly, cultural leaders do. You just do have the ability to change and to help the black community if you were to recognize that and to put out an effort to actively reach out to black people, not just say, "Oh, I'm open. I'll have black people work for me." I've seen them. I just the resumes don't come in. So what am I gonna do? If I see a Tyrone Johnson come in, I'll do the application and it'll be fine. I'll do the interview if if he's well dressed and All right, I'm done with the Ben Shapiro impersonation there. All right, Ben. But you know what I'm saying. I don't know why I'm impersonating you when you're right here, but look, either way it goes, that's the end of the conversation. I think my point was made. There is a cultural problem as a result of racism. But the modern day fix, you do have a role to play in it, and it's not just not being racist. You do kind of have to actively do some things. As a political and cultural leader, I say you have that responsibility. But if you don't think you are that, obviously then you're going to look at it differently than me. But I think you are that. I think most of your fans think you are that, and I think you are that. So I am going to say you're kind of responsible for doing that. But anyways, that's the video. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, all the good stuff is in the description or comment section or on the screen or wherever it's going to be. I'm not quite sure yet. Thanks for taking the time to watch. I appreciate it. Have a great one. Thank you.